Buen día. Buenos días, damas y caballeros, distinguidas autoridades y representantes del sector energético de la región. Les saluda Gloria Alvarenga, soy la directora de integración de OLADE. En nombre de la Organización Latinoamericana de Energía, del Ministerio de Industria, Energía y Minería de Uruguay, del Banco Interamericano de Desarrollo BID y del primer foro de inversiones de IRENA, les extendemos una cálida bienvenida a esta 8ª edición de la Semana de la Energía. Queremos expresar nuestro profundo agradecimiento, especialmente a Uruguay, a la ciudad de Montevideo, que nos ha dado una grata acogida en estos días, y también a nuestros auspiciantes principales y nuestros apoyos institucionales y media partners por su colaboración en la realización de este importante encuentro. Me complace mucho darle la bienvenida a este primer conversatorio de género y energía en el marco de esta 8ª Semana de la Energía, en el que buscamos generar un diálogo que busque impulsar acciones dirigidas a garantizar la incorporación de una perspectiva de género en todas las actividades y operaciones vinculadas en el sector de la energía en América Latina y el Caribe para promover la igualdad de género y el empoderamiento de las mujeres y niñas de la región. En términos generales, como todos sabemos, las mujeres experimentamos brechas de desigualdad a nivel salarial, de educación, acceso a la propiedad, participación en políticas, entre muchos otros aspectos que también son evidentes en el sector energético. Y es por eso que desde OLADE estamos comprometidos para apoyar a poder abogar a estas políticas inclusivas y equitativas que garanticen esta participación activa y significativa de las mujeres en todas las etapas del proceso, entendiendo que este es un papel de todos y es un esfuerzo conjunto en el que nos llevará a promover una transición de un modelo de desarrollo actual. Es un honor para mí presentar en primera instancia a nuestras oradoras magistrales, que son referentes en el tema, un ejemplo e inspiración para todos. Comienzo entonces dándole la bienvenida a la excelentísima señora Michelle Bachelet, quien fue presidenta de su país en 2 periodos no consecutivos y también fue la primera presidencia por tempore de UNASUR, la primera encargada de ONU Mujeres, la Agencia de las Naciones Unidas para la Igualdad de Género. Se ha desempeñado como alta comisionada de las Naciones Unidas para los Derechos Humanos y ocupa el cargo honorífico de presidenta de la Alianza para la Salud de la Madre y Recién Nacido y el Niño de la Organización Mundial de la Salud. Bienvenida.
Good morning, everybody. Ministers, vice ministers, authorities, of course, of OLADE, and also to all the participants today. I am very happy to be here with you. I would like to thank this invitation to participate in this 8th week of energy organized by OLADE together with all the other organizations, and very happy to participate in this space with this regional organization that has a trajectory of 50 years. None of us here have any doubts that energy is a key issue. Today we will be talking about gender and energy, which is very relevant because energy drives human development and it can improve or worsen the lives of people. So it can have an impact in the educational changes, social and economic changes that will allow to reach equality between men and women. And regarding the roles allocated to men and women, it is this related to the use and access of what gender does with energy. For the ECLAC, the energy sector has 2 dimensions. One is the basic needs and the economic participation. Women and men play different social roles. In the case of women, they have reproduction roles, community roles, and they are related with energy as producers or users of energy. In the energy sector, as in many others, as Gloria said, women have inequality gaps. And in general terms, these gaps have inequality in salaries, education, access to property, politics, and gender equality is not something that we have to do just because it's fair, but it's also because it's something smart to do. In the global GDP would increase 26% by 2050 if we included women in labor at the same rate than men. If we look at the secondary part of employment, men have 74% of the active population, and they have an energy and water sector is mostly a men's sector. So this shows the different expectations between men and women since the primary school, and they foster the idea that men, the boys, are better for maths than girls. There's a story from a president of a very important university in the United States that said that women don't have a brain for maths. That was his last day he was a president. And he was from Harvard. So this stereotype must be fought from the very first day of classes, otherwise they will multiply throughout education. In Latin America and the Caribbean, women represent 60% of the graduates of university, but only 30% have degrees in science, engineering, maths. In my country, the figures are even worse. We only have 19% of women's participation in these careers. According to studies at global level, women have a lower salary than men by 20% less. In oil and gas sector, women only have a fourth of the employees. And we need to have this in a hierarchy point of view. Men hold more executive positions than women, not only in the energy sector, but it is even more in the energy sector. And in decision-making positions, it again has more men than women. And women are victims of bias, unconscious bias, because of their professions, because men occupy most of the executive positions, and this is a lack of understanding of the obstacles that women have to develop their professional careers. When I was in charge of INGLES, I read a very interesting article of a company that really wanted to break the glass ceiling, and it did a lot of activities for women to be able to be promoted and grow in their profession. But after 1 year, nothing had happened. In the second year, they started to wonder, why isn't anything happening? We have the political will, we want to do this. And for the same position, there was a man and a woman competing, and both had very good performance. Both of these persons had a regular performance in the interview, but the woman said, they said that the woman was excellent in the interview, and that she was very sure of herself. And then they said that the man had good potential. This is a scientific study, so there is invisible bias regarding men and women. So many times people don't realize, they're not conscious that they have a bias. So this is something we must keep in mind. In France, there was a woman who was a president in one TV program, and she said, this happened last week also. There was a candidate, a man and a woman, and they said, okay, the woman said, I can do 4 out of 5 of the things you want me to do, but I can learn. And the man said, oh, I'm wonderful. I can do things wonderfully well. So now, apart from the hierarchy issues and executive positions, we also have this lack of vision. An energy policy with a focus on gender should keep in mind different social relations between men and women, and also a difference. We must also look at the design of energy policies. It's been a process of designing for men and by men, and this has left women out. And there are many challenges to ensure the sustainable inclusion of women. There are technical issues and leadership issues. It's relevant to consider 2 dimensions and 2 challenges that we see today: the structural obstacles and the gap of capacities. The structural barriers for women in the energy sector, I would like to mention a few. One, from the start of this industry, they never considered the need of women. This is a problem that has very practical components because we can see facilities with no bathrooms for women, and they don't have sometimes the right size for women of their uniforms. I remember women when they had to go to the ships on board, and they said, what's missing? What's lacking? Well, they don't have uniforms for women. They don't fit them. So these are practical issues, but they're very important also. And this was seen especially in operational positions. We only have 9% of women in Chile in energy sectors in these positions. So there's also a bias in recruitment. Women usually are more robust in administrative sectors. In the energy sector in Chile, we have 57% of secretaries, people who work in marketing and communications. But this labor participation cannot be considered as inclusive. Some might say 57% of women is good, but it was like when we wanted to have women in the army of Chile, they were put in uniform to be doctors or others, but they weren't part of the army in itself. So sometimes figures can be quite confusing because we have underrepresentation of women. As I said, operational 57%, but in executive positions below 20. So we lack strategies to foster women throughout the cycle. We also have labor trajectories that are uninterrupted, or sometimes have gender-based violence, sometimes lack of consideration of their family. In Chile, we have a post-birth period for men, and we had to show everyone that this was very important, but only 2% use this of the man's post-birth leave. It was a sign that men could also help with the children and be with their children when they were born. And so again, we have a lot of work for women in the household. Now, teleworking has given benefits, but it also has disadvantages because it leaves women away from decision-making positions. Gender-based problems is seen in the energy sector because women leave their jobs. There also is lack of understanding in this sector as to how to address this issue. There's a symbolic violence on gender with the low participation of women in events on energy where there is a very large presence of men. I was telling the minister today that the United Nations made the decision that all the panels had to be equal in men and women because women need to have this participation. They have the same power to make decisions and they want to participate. So this lack of the fourth thing I want to say is that the last structural obstacle is the lack of binding instruments, legislations that allow gender policies in the energy sector. We asked all the state companies that they should have at least 40% of women in the companies. It was very difficult, believe me. And many private companies started copying and they started doing the same thing because it was quite dumb not to do this. Because at the end of 2000s, in all those places where there were more women in the executive level, their company was doing better because it was a very smart thing to do. In the case of Chile, when coordinated work with IRENA, like commitment, support, and other public acknowledgement, I'm talking about the private sector, the problem is that accountability is quite complex. Although there are international frameworks and organizations that support all of this, we cannot move forward towards sustainable jobs with equal gender. Now I'm going to talk about the gap. Again, we have a lack of participation of women in hierarchical positions. The second element is that the women are joining the energy sector in a quite delayed time. And this means that most have had to specialize in the sector much after they studied or required additional information. There are young girls who are studying here, they are present. Now, good practices that can be reproduced for gender equality in the energy sector. It's key to solve a problem and to have enough information. We must create data. In the first level is corporate level. We need precise information, global data, also salary gaps, executive positions. Second, internal diagnosis of institutions. The institutions must understand their internal organization. Number three, discrimination, harassment, bullying, access to information. It's also important to have strategic alliances and ensure commitments at all levels. All the organizations in the sector must have commitment to gender equality from the very top level to the very lowest level of the hierarchy. We have a particular challenge for inclusion in public policies. They must coordinate all the players of the public and private sector. We must have laws, integral, comprehensive decrees and policies to have gender equality. In Chile, we have a law that says there must be present accountability in the private sector. Here, I want to highlight a law in Chile that promotes transparency and adoption of measures for women's equality in sectors that are mostly men. And the industries, such as the energy sector, must prepare a report on gender equality. And we have this as a commission of the international market. We also need to have public policies, such as the Energía Más Mujeres in Chile, which has been a public and private effort with 100 companies in the energy sector to move forward towards gender equality. Also, invest for change. We must have infrastructure and consider women. Well, there, as I said, uniforms, bathrooms for women, and when possible, we must have support for women's inclusion. We must also train women for the sector. We must include specific goals for women. Like the Ministry of Energy in Chile has an objective to have 30% of women and 18,000 trainings for women. And this will happen by 2030. We must have participation of women in the decision-making processes. So they must be in hierarchy positions, they must be in committees and commissions, and this is relevant, especially now when we are rethinking about the energy towards a clean energy. We must raise awareness, talk about culture also. We must bring people together towards the objectives of gender equality in the energy sector, especially in a scenario of just transition. We must raise awareness in the industry and all sectors and the public in general. We have the Ministry of Energy in Chile have hashtag Mujeres Suman. We have panels of experts with women and events of the energy sector with women participating. We must promote this in education, in schools. As you can see, we have many challenges in the energy sector, but we also have many things that we can do to close this gap, this gender gap. I was told that it's it's very likely that OLADE will be making the decisions through the 17 member ministers to establish the Gender Commission on Energy. I think that's a wonderful, wonderful idea. This is to motivate those of you who are not so sure about this. I believe that it will be very good for the energy sector to address the challenges we have. Because all people, doesn't matter what gender they have to play a role in gender equality. Because apart from having to face all the other challenges we have, such as climate change, so we need to have inclusion policies that ensure the active participation of women in all the stages and processes of the energy sector, because this will bring about sustainable development. Many changes won't happen if we don't have half of the population on board, which is women. So in South Africa, Montuto said a phrase that I like to repeat. For some jobs, it's very important to remember this. He described himself as a prisoner of hope. So as a prisoner of hope, I think it's time to modernize the energy sector by including more women and collaborating in this very important sector by having more participation of women and have more equality for all.
Muchísimas gracias.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Bachelet, for your inspiring words that motivate us and give us strength to move forward, because this is an effort. It has to be a joint effort, so thank you very much. Now I will introduce Mrs. Silvia Maldi, the president of the ANCAP of UTE in Uruguay. She has computational systems in the University of Montevideo. She has participated in different spaces, courses, and conferences at a global level related to management improvement and IT solutions. She's had also a good participation in projects to improve management in different organizations. Welcome. Good morning, everybody. It's a pleasure to be part of this panel. It's an honor to be here. Your former president, your words were very inspiring. We want to congratulate Olade for its 50th anniversary, and also for the organization of IRENA, also the Ministry of Industry, Energy and Mining. We want to give a big round of applause to Elisa Fase. We have been colleagues. We were together from school all the way up to university. And we got a degree as engineers from the University of the Republic together. So it's an honor to be working together in the energy sector with such a renowned background and working towards gender equality. The energy sector, and those of us who are part of this sector, have a challenge to foster actions that will include gender perspective in all the activities that we carry out, because we need to reduce the gender gap and we must have equality in decision making. We need to have equal opportunities in the labor market for women. In what the United Nations considers the Sustainable Development Goals, we have to foster and improve equality gaps. The objective number 17 needs to have accessible energy in order to be able to develop the activities that will improve the quality of lives and production in the countries. So what gender strategy should we develop in Latin America to position and allow access to energy to everyone in the inclusive energy sector policies? As I said, As Michelle Bachelet said, we have the challenge of giving access to girls and women to education. And I know we've made very good advances in many areas, but not in all the areas. This is something that is acknowledged globally because we must act on this in order to have scientific excellence and to have greater development of the countries, trying to stop with the segregation that we see, trying to explain the obstacles that continue not allowing women to access the different areas of energy. So we have many questions to ask ourselves. Are these stereotypes that keep women away from these careers and professions? When I studied with Elisa, when we were studying IT, we were 40% women who started studying this in School of Engineering in the 80s, and today it's 16% women. So it's a paradox, right? When we all now have access to technology, when we make a decision to study this, we saw things very far away from us, but now everything is accessible to us. However, girls and young women do not choose to study IT and engineering. So is it that the education programs restrict women from studying these, or is it that we women are more to other professions? Is it that we need to change these realities? Because we are sure that we can change the realities by including cross-cutting policies in energy and other sectors. Maybe it's a lack of successful women in the sector, and maybe young girls should identify with the successful women in the sector. Here in the team and in the audience, we have people who work in UTE, men and women who work every day to make these possibilities cross-cutting. And I took some words that have to do with work that has been developed in the organization, especially Andrea Tutte, who did her master's degree in gender policies, and I believe that she can transmit this knowledge to all of us in a natural way, that we should, because we need to include this in our organizations. Claudia Goldbing, an economist who got the Nobel Prize for her studies on gender gap, she says that the women who choose these science professions, it takes us a lot of time because we also have a lot of time to take care of our children. So we usually choose a profession that will allow us to have more time for our family, and therefore we do not advance in other professions or that require more time. In UTE, in this state company that gives electricity to all the population of the country and has a complete cycle in generation, transmission, distribution, and marketing of electricity, we have the commitment to work with equal opportunities and the full participation of women in the labor market, promoting economic autonomy and being able to be promoted in the team. That's why we have multidisciplinary teams. And but the truth is that it is a very masculine sector. In UTE in 2006, we created the Observatory of Gender, and we started implementing measures that try to strengthen different areas that will allow us to carry out different activities to have more women. In UTE, we have 6,200 staff, out of only 25% are women. In 2020, I took office as the president of UTE, and I was the first woman in its history, in its 108 years of life of UTE. There had never been a woman president before in UTE. And the truth is, the reality shows us that in the board, we have 5 members in the board, 3 of us are women. So this is something that had never happened before in the company either. So again, we still have a lot of things to do, but we are building this, and that's our commitment. No doubt that we have many challenges, and we need to include more women in operational positions also. As Bachelet said, this does not mean 140 women that are working there. We need to have bathrooms for women. We need to give women their uniforms. We've had to redesign many things. We have 140 women working in the operations area, but before we didn't have any, so we are working on this. Before, when we wanted to recruit people for operational areas, it was in a gender, it said operarios, which in Spanish is only for men, but now we have changed the language. We say operarios and operarias, because now we include men and women. So as I said, we have to start educating from the very beginning of education, from primary school, so that women can choose these careers, these studies. Also, as we said, we have 25% women, but most of us are in the customer service, in marketing, in finance departments, but as I said before, we still have a lot of challenges to have more women in other areas of the company. And also in top management, we also want more women in these positions. In UTE, we have an external consultancy area. Many of them are here. We have a history of 30 years of the external consultancy, and we work a lot to support other organizations, national organizations in management, but also state companies at international level. And at the beginning of 2020, very recently, before the COVID-19, there was a group of consultants, men and women from UTE, that went to a country in Latin America. I'm not going to say the name, but they went to work for 2 months to support the consultancy. It was an electricity company also, and the day they arrived, it was a Sunday, and the top management of the company, it was a sister company, went to pick up our consultants at the airport. Again, they were men and women. And when they received them, the president of the company said, "This is wonderful. Look at Uruguayan consultants. They travel with their wives." So the wives that were not wives, they were consultants, said, "We are also consultants." And that means, that shows that that didn't happen 50 years ago. It happened in 2020. So again, we have to continue working on this and working hard, because we had men and women consultants from our state company in Uruguay that was going to help another company. It's wonderful that in the case of UTE, as I said before, apart from including since 2006 the Observatory of Gender, some of the practices that we've had in our organization to make management be internalized regarding equity, diversity, and the different aspects of this. Also to have people with disabilities, also transgender, and making working teams become more diverse, more mixed every day more. This contributes to having better results in our organization. So one of the practices that we have in a structured company, as the electricity company, where everything has to be with protocols, we must look at security, and we don't have much space sometimes in some areas for innovation. For us, we've seen the inclusion of the gender equality model. We have included this, and this is promoted by the Ministry of Social Development, and we have included this in UTE, and this has to do a lot with ISO 9000 standards, which allows us to consider all the aspects of management in a company, its policies, procedures, ways of working, infrastructure, regarding the bathrooms, sometimes breastfeeding facilities. Also, sometimes we have movable facilities, because many times our staff has to travel to different parts of the country. So we have all these new practices in our structure, because it's a infrastructure model, a structure model that has all these developments. And in 2021, the board of UTE established this process for all the organization, because it had been done only in some specific areas. In technology, communications, we were starting in the commercial area, but then we said, no, this must be a practice of all the company. So we are on this road. Since 2021, we certified the first level of this, last year the second level, and today we are working on the third level. So what have been the key aspects of this process? Like joining the web commitments of involving women. We have top management, middle management, trying to include women, all gender perspective that is cross-cutting, human management in the organization from the very beginning, since the moment we recruit people. So we explicitly show the profile, but we also work with universities, with the Technological University of Uruguay, to have the participation of more girls and young women in these careers. Also, when we have internal contests, we give training. We make sure that all the contests are done without bias, with equal opportunities for all. And again, violence, gender violence is something that we are working on very hard in the organization. We have a commission that looks at the different denouncements when there are some behaviors that are not within our correct behaviors. So we also promote co-responsibility standards, like Bachelet said, and also this was marked as something very specific to reduce gender gaps. We have special areas for care, especially for relatives or the elderly. We have men and women of UTE can have 30 days leave to take care of the elderly or relatives. And also we have maternity leave that before was only for women. Now we have paternal leave for men also, and it's optional. It's only a few men who have adhered to the paternal leave to go take care of their children. But the experience that we have seen is that men come and say, this is wonderful. I wish I could have done this with my earlier children, that I wasn't able to stay with them, to take care of them. So I am very thankful that we have these new policies. So in the case of women, they can go again to work faster because their husbands, the father of the child, can take care of their children now also with its leave. But again, there are still some cultural issues that have to be overcome, that people believe sometimes it's only women who should take care of their children and not men. So this is a very cultural change that we need to foster. It's essential to transform the reality, and we have to do that jointly. We need to have public policies starting by education and all public and private areas to contribute to eliminate these gender gaps. In our sector, we are looking at decarbonization, including renewable energy, energy efficiency, new vectors such as hydrogen that will replace fossil fuels. We consider that it's key to include renewables to have environmental sustainability, but also energy equality, because clean energy must reach all the population, and looking even more specifically at the most vulnerable population, and also people who are in remote areas and don't have access to energy, and also many women who are generally the heads of households must be able to develop ventures. But it's essential that they have access to energy that is quality energy, clean energy, and that's what we are working on, together with all the practices and policies at the Ministry of Industry and in the executive power are working on. So we must contribute to have a better quality of life, developing production areas. That's our purpose as a public utility company. We must also be able to include more energy for everyone through PV for everyone, or the other lines of energy. So we will be installing more solar panels in areas that are 5 kilometers from these panels. We are including all of this, and to finish, as the Vice President of the Republic said yesterday, it's essential to have networks of women for the interaction required in this sector, to exchange ideas, talk about best practices and progress. And yesterday we heard this also. There are teams and groups of women in energy in Argentina, Chile, El Salvador, Mexico, Dominican Republic, and others. And yesterday in the IDB meeting we heard about these progress. So we want to share with you the launch of the meeting group of women in energy in Uruguay, AUME. This brings together women in the energy sector, which is a relevant initiative because this was not available before. We want to promote networks between women, training, make women more visible in the energy sector, to disseminate the work of the sector, promote that more girls and young women will be interested in this sector, and this will contribute to improving the labor conditions in the sector. We have a lot of women who have joined this group already from the private and public sector and from the academy also. We want to disseminate this group in order to reach more women in the energy sector. And of course we have the support of our Minister of Industry that took office yesterday. We share with you a video of the launch of this women's group of energy in Uruguay.
En un grupo de 10 profesionales.
In a group of 10 professionals, we had maybe one woman in the group. This energy sector is a very masculine sector. 1 out of 5 workers who work in the gas and oil sector are women. 1 out of 3 in the energy sector are women. Only 9% of the executive positions are women. The companies, the most diverse companies with greater participation of women, want to have more efficiency, better performance, and the more diverse we are, we will have other contributions, other ways of managing the challenges that we have in the sector. We must have a just transition with the participation of all people. We are in the process of changing, but we must raise awareness. We must put these on the table in order to make the change in the long term. There's an initiative of creating a women's network with a gender perspective for energy. What we want to achieve is to have the participation of women open the doors, open the paths in the long term. We go to the university, we have master's degree, and sometimes we can promote policies that are important for women also. To look at the sector, to bridge the gaps of women, we need to have training. We need to have networking, which is very important for women. We want more girls and young women to study engineering and other professions. Many times women bring a different point of view. And I want to believe that we also bring a lot of empowerment and strength. I love what I do. Every day I come and I love what I do, and I think it would be wonderful that more women could come and discover this world, which is beautiful. Thank you very much, President. First of all, because you are a reference as a woman in Uruguay, being the president of UTE, the first woman president of UTE, and also for the rest of the region. And also I want to congratulate Uruguay for activating, for being active, and for taking a step forward on this networking and having this women's network. Thank you. Thank you very much to the two speakers. And now we will go on to our first panel. We are a little bit delayed in our schedule, but I wish to welcome Mrs. Schneider from IDB, who will be supporting us by moderating the panel. She will be introducing the panelists. Good morning, everybody. I'm very happy to be here. Thank you, Olade, for organizing this event. Gloria, in particular, thank you very much for all the work you have done. I know it was a lot of work. President Michelle Bachelet, thank you for being here, for giving us your wonderful words. To the new minister, Alicia Facio, thank you also for being here, accompanying us. And the president of UTE also, we are so happy and grateful that you are with us. You are a reference in Uruguay. Thank you very much. I welcome all the authorities, delegations, vice ministers. I'm going to call you to the stage. I would like to ask Francisca Valenzuela from the Ministry of Energy in Chile to please come forward. Thank you. Welcome. Almin Duran from CFE from Mexico. Maria Cecilia Garibote from the energy sector from the Ministry of Economy of Argentina. Tomás Rodriguez from Honduras, Secretary of Energy of Honduras. Marina Gil from the Union of Natural Resources of ECLAC. And Constanza Ican from Sancas, Chile. Before we start, here we have actors from the public sector, the private sector, and from ECLAC that also gives us the knowledge from the academy. And to put this into context, we are going to have a session where each of you are going to tell us what you're doing in your countries, how you're pushing forward the policies. Now, we will require a great effort in the energy sector to reach the goals established by the countries for climate change and also in the Paris Accord. That effort will require very important transformation, technical transformations, in including more renewable energy in the energy grid, in the labor. But this will also require a social change, a social transformation. By 2023, we expect decarbonization, and the economy could create 15 million jobs in Latin America and the Caribbean. This is a study that was done with the ILO and IDB. So the challenge will be to look at the losers and the winners and ensure that we will have a just transition. The transition plans for energy of the countries describe more or less the main objectives and the way in which countries and government agencies will lead their energy policies in their countries. However, in the bank, we prepared a study where we collected the policies, energy plans, documents on decarbonization, and we found something which was alarming regarding job and gender. This was practically invisible. It was not there in the documents. Only a few countries mentioned how they were going to include more women in their workforce towards the energy transition. And this is alarming because 15 million jobs will be created with energy transformation, but half the population is not being considered in that transformation. So it is essential to build and reach an understanding in society as to how that labor force, that workforce must be created in the future, and how women and men together can benefit equally with this transition. We must promote gender equality in energy plans. This will lead us towards a more sustainable tomorrow. The energy sector will include more technology, more digitalization, and there will be a significant deficit of workforce. When we look at cybersecurity, we see a big lack of human resources. So we must take this opportunity. But women need to have knowledge to be able to fill these positions. It's an opportunity. Women must be given the opportunity to be part of that workforce that is needed. The governments in the public sector, private sector, civil society must work together so that women can play the role that they can have. And we must have equal opportunities. This process must be an opportunity to promote a more just society, a just transition, therefore, and we must ensure equal opportunities for women in this transition. We must promote this professionally in the different areas. So what are we doing at IDB in this regard? First of all, in all operations, technical cooperation, we need to have gender cooperation. All the loans must have a budget to execute gender actions. We also give knowledge, we develop knowledge internally and with other organizations. We need to have data and information to show why investments in gender opportunities give an economic benefit, as was mentioned before. We also support dissemination, such as what we did yesterday, bringing together different networks of different countries to exchange ideas and experiences. We also have technical cooperation for countries that are just starting and don't know where to start, how to create their own plans, how to create a protocol of equal opportunities for gender. Now I will ask the panelists to tell us about how they are working in their countries in this regard. I will start with the minority right now in this panel. And we are very thankful to have you here because it's important to have panels that represent all of us. So we must have men and women when we discuss gender. Tomás? In Honduras, you are doing a lot of things regarding gender. You've done this in a cross-cutting way, and you have worked also. Yesterday you got a prize. Could you please tell the audience, how have you included this? How have you made this cross-cutting in Honduras? Good morning. Thank you, Virginia. My greetings to all the women here on the panel. I feel very fortunate to participate as a witness and as a learner also in this process. Anthropologically speaking, historically speaking, this is something that we must do. We must have inclusion and gender equality in humanity. In Honduras, we have made this cross-cutting, equality, opportunities and justice of gender. I won't discuss each of these concepts, but we have gender equality, with a vision of the first, because we show this with the first woman president we have in the country, Mrs. Castro. With her point of view as a woman, she has put as a plan of the government, as a priority in her plan, to have gender equality. So we have a mandate. It's not a mandate, it's a guideline, so that all the staff of the government, all the people who work in the government must have that vision of making this cross-cutting. And we started working in all the institutions that create state policies, all the powers, the ministries that create policies must have a component, a gender component, in all the policies they create. We must, it's our obligation, it's an ethic obligation. It's not only a mandate. It can be a mandate, but we are aware that this is what we have to do. It's not because it's mandatory to do so. And we also have to participate in a global vision as to where the world is headed. And many countries have made more progress than us. So we must keep our eyes open. We must keep our ears and our mouth open in order to manifest and to receive the guidelines from other countries that have advanced more than us. So we must pay attention to that and take notes in order to reach those levels of well-being. The cross-cutting, gender equality as a cross-cutting issue should not be something that we just talk about. It must be a way, it must be the way we behave in our daily lives. We must, this is not something that we celebrate at an event. It must just be the way we do things normally. So we've been with this government for 2 years, and we want to leave this heritage in many laws and many policies that we are creating. Social electricity policy, a policy of universal access to electricity and energy, and many others that I could mention, but I won't go into detail. We want to leave this legacy. I know that a government, when you're in office, you don't have much time. In my country, the government is in office for 4 years, and it's very little time to do everything we want to do. But at least we have to set the basis. We must leave a guideline as a legacy. I might not see it. Maybe you can't see it during a lifetime, but it's something we want to leave. It has a greater objective. It's for the future. We want to leave a vision of gender equality that can be achieved in whatever time is needed, but at least we're establishing this basis in Honduras, and we are looking at the different perspectives that we all have, trying to do things the best we can. Thank you very much, Tomas. Now I'm going to Chile. Maria Francisca. Chile has been a reference. You've always been one step ahead regarding gender and energy in the region, and it's been wonderful to work with you in this. Please tell the audience something that you developed, which is Energy Plan Plus Women. I think it's been a very successful plan. Please tell us about that. And what results are you seeing with this? Thank you very much. Well, good morning, everybody. It's a great honor to be here. I would like to tell you a little bit about the history of this plan. We will also maybe zoom in to some characteristics of this. In the case of Chile, there was a study, a diagnosis. My colleague Sulaman also started in Mujeres in Chile. The first thing for us is to have a baseline analysis. What happens with inequality, gender inequalities? We have evidence of gender inequalities. So the first diagnosis we did in Chile, we saw the participation of women in the energy sector that was only 23%. And there's a trick to that, because within that 23%, 57% are women in administrative areas, which is what the president was talking about. These are women who enter the energy sector in a delayed stage of their profession, and they start in different areas. So we started with this baseline to show the need to create a public policy, which is a public and private effort to move forward in gender equality. This was an effort that broke the inertia, because gender was not a topic at the time. And in general, we have a lot of women when we talk about this. We need you also to create this change. You are agents of change. So this plan, Más Mujeres, we have more than 110 companies in the energy sector that are part of this effort today. And companies that are interested, they join us, and we give them technical assistance. What are the objectives, the commitments? The plan has 10 axes, more than 40 actions, and the companies can choose where they want to start, what they want to take from this. By 2030, we have a very specific commitment, which will be to have sustainable inclusion in the workforce. That means that let's not only think about access. Access is not everything. I've always said this since I've been at the Ministry of Energy. We think that only recruiting women is enough. But if I don't do an internal study, if I don't know the reality of my institution, and I can ensure sustainable inclusion, I might lose talents. So, the president talked about things like lack of bathrooms for women, lack of uniforms for women, lack of policies against gender violations. If I don't see what women do 3 times more housework than men, probably those women will feel that that's not their place anymore. So when we talk about sustainable labor inclusion, it's not only about making a study and say, okay, I found an engineer, a woman engineer, I found a woman technician. We have to listen to the needs of the women in the institution. And that's where our plan has had the technical assistance of UN Women. Many of us here have taken that step, and we talk about these topics. What does it mean to have women's participation in top executive positions? We have a 24% salary gap in Chile with regards to gender. We cannot have colleagues who are doing exactly the same job and they are earning 24% less than men. That is alarming. And in particular, in Energy Más Mujeres, we realize that companies many times are afraid of measuring themselves, of looking at themselves. And that's a barrier that we must overcome. And that it's not so much about a judgment, but taking on responsibilities. So to close this aspect, that companies can have gender policies. The work with the institutions many times is reduced from, it's many times taken from a violence protocol. But if we want to have a gender policy, we must work at different levels. Internal diagnosis, we need to have adequate protocols, good conciliation measures. Where are my bias on gender? Why are we leaving women out? What leadership are we having as an institution? So we work on everything. But also another thing that was mentioned, in Chile we don't have binding instruments. What does this mean? That we work in the energy sector based on commitment. And which is very good. And sometimes we cannot reach the steps we want to reach. Many times gender, and I will close now, but it's important to say this, sometimes we see that advancing in gender equality has a lot to do with opinions and the goodwill of doing things, and not the responsibilities that we have regarding human rights. Sometimes people say, okay, let me talk about it, I'm going to discuss it. Gender equality is not about opinions. It's not about if you believe it's good, if you like it or not. It's what we have to do. It's where we have to go. It's our obligation. It's our responsibility. And if you don't realize this, then we have to be concerned, because there is a responsibility and an obligation that goes beyond my opinion or if I like it or not. If you don't like it, I don't care. It's what we have to do. So, and just to close, In Mujeres has been an umbrella for an office that has been there for human rights. We don't only have a plan, we have an office. We have human capital areas, 30% of women that are trained out of the 18,000 trainings we have in certification by 2030, and an education program. We work with teachers. This is a program that is free of stereotypes. We know that the work with the industry is very important, but also at all levels, because as we said, there are structural obstacles. And to close, we recently had an activity for green hydrogen in Chile and gender. Our last activity was held very recently. It was the Women's Network in Green Hydrogen. And they ask sometimes, why do you want a network for this? But the fact is that when we are in a sector that has more men, it's very important to have the faces of women, because when you connect women, you find collective needs. It's not an individual need. You have support, you have collective support, you have less risk in decision making. And we did that in a course we had recently only for women, for electric installers. In this sector, we have the potential to change the lives of people, to create jobs, to have better professional trajectories. We need women for this. We have a window of opportunities. And so, they said, I was less afraid of making the wrong decision. The women who had children supported each other in order to finish the course, because we understood the problems that were faced by my colleague. So we supported each other. And in hydrogen, we are creating an industry. We have to have standards, and we have to involve women from the very beginning, because it's a great opportunity. It has to be sustainable development. When we talk about sustainability, we're talking about gender equality. Thank you. Now we have Constanza. Constanza, you have a presentation for us. And you're also an entrepreneur. You're working in the private sector. So we are very interested in hearing what you have to say regarding the private sector and what are the tools that are needed. What does the public sector need, and how can it work with the private sector? Let's put the presentation on the screen. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much for having me. It's an honor to be here today. Yeah, well, I'm here representing innovation. So I would like to start having this conversation on innovation, and it is the map published by Irina about the 30 necessary technologies to reach electric markets that are modern and sustainable. The 30 technologies that we're not going to be reviewing one by one, they describe what is necessary in digital and physical technologies, market design, operation of electric systems, and all these technologies and market designs are necessary to be implemented if you want to make progress and to achieve the goals for energy transition, climate change, and within that transition, not to talk only about decarbonization, but also about democratizing access to decentralization and future business models. thing is that if we don't make progress in gender, because it is a responsibility or it is the ethical thing to do, we are leaving behind 50% corresponding to women, 50% of ideas, 50% of future business, 50% of the implementing capacity. All these have required innovations, but according to Crunchbase, that is the main website where all transactions and investment to technological startups, only 2.3% of investment goes to startups created by women.
Solo el 2,3%.
Only 2.3%. So there's a 50% of women on the planet, but we have only 2% of investment to those companies led by women. Depending on the country, between 80 and 90% of the investment goes to companies 100% with men. And then we have a mix with men and women. So we won't have the future that we want to have. All our commitments with the climate change, social commitments, and the future of the electric market that we want to build in Latin America and the Caribbean, if we don't consider ideas by women. Basically, we're leaving those ideas unattended. It's like trying to win the world championship of football, but only with the 50% of our team. So I wanted to share this. This is a specific initiative that took place in Chile to provide support to projects and companies led by women. And I've been a beneficiary of this strategy. I founded Sancas, that is a Chilean startup that use AI for renewable energies and basically forecasts for solar and wind centrals and sends that information to the operator, that is the National Electric Coordinator in Chile. And that is what we want to expand to other countries in the region. So my project was supported by this promotion that we have in Chile that basically provides direct grants to entrepreneurs. So here we have a graph, and this is about this year. This is from 2020. We got 22% of the investment got to companies led by women. So what we are saying that the Latin American level was 2%, well, with these steps that were taken in Chile, we increased that to 22%. So as part of the gender strategies of Corfo, I wanted to highlight 3 main points that were useful to us. First of all, cross-cutting definition of women companies. In all call for bids, it says that a company led by women, if complies with the some requirements, like 50% of the shares should be owned by women, the general manager should be a woman, or if the project that you are presenting will be led by a woman. You have 3 options. With any of those 3 conditions, you can present that a company led by women. There is a very clear definition that is included in all the terms. Then we have co-funding additional for projects already accepted. So for all those countries or organizations that don't dare to give an extra point for a project, if they are led by women, this is a benefit that applies to all the projects already accepted. So these 20 projects were accepted, and those of these 20 that are led by women will get a higher co-funding. That is to say, the company has to return an amount lower than the one they got. And that is also connected to reality, because women, when it comes to banking terms, we get fewer credits, but also when we receive those credits, they are smaller in size. So we get them fewer times and less money. And the third point here is that there are specific calls for women. Because in this figure here, all those things that are in blue, those are funds for companies without women or that do not fulfill the requirements that I had just told you about. And then in red, we have funds that got to companies led by women. What happened that even though we had all this support, still we have a lot of blue. So they said, okay, let's make progress and let's create one specific line for women that is S factory. That is the first one. Of all these lines, since they have so much blue, they created a specific line for women, basically for startups created by women. These are some different measures that could be implemented. I am a beneficiary as a technology startup to develop my project, and I wanted to share that with you because you may implement this in your countries. Thank you. Marina, since you work in CEPAL for Latin America and the Caribbean, tell us about your proposal and which are the opportunities connected to energy transition.
Virginia. Bueno, pues efectivamente.
Well, yeah, from ECLAC, we are generating evidence and strategies for countries in the region make progress in economic development, productive development, gender equality, reduction of poverty, improvement of the environment. And what we're seeing here is that gender equality in energy transition policies plays a fundamental role and contributes to sustainable development in the region. There are some thoughts that I would like to share with you today. We believe that we need to go deeper in these concepts. First of all, we believe that we need to enhance research and evidence of the relations between society of care, energy poverty, and the protection of our natural resources. In this sense, especially natural resources used for energy in the region, we have 20% of the oil in the world, 4% of the natural gas, a quarter of biofuels, and a huge potential for the renewable generation, especially hydro, solar, and wind. At this point, we believe that we need to create the regulatory framework and the governance framework to protect these natural resources and all the benefits generated by this transition. And this governance framework should include gender equity and poverty reduction connected to energy, especially for those communities affected by all this. Secondly, something else is that we believe that we need to increase the connection of the use of time of women, access to electricity and access to education and the labor market. In this sense, we're not talking about participation of women in the energy sector, but we are talking about the fact that women participate more in the economy. And in that sense, when we give them access to electricity, we need to mention how that is going to improve social conditions and productivity in the region. And lastly, the third point is about participation in itself, participation in the energy sector, both in the private and the public sector.
Es generar la evidencia.
And in that sense, we want to generate evidence on how gender perspective innovation has positive effects. Yesterday, we saw several examples in the region on how to make use of the human potential of women in Latin America to move on to those transformations. Thank you. Nimbe, we have talked a lot about the labor market But I would like you to tell us about all those other aspects related to access to electricity and women that live in remote places that sometimes need to cook using firewood, and then all the impact this has on their health and their children's, the time it takes, time that they cannot use for other purposes. So we have all these issues about access to electricity that is so important. So I would like you to tell us about those electrification processes that you have been working on in Mexico and the proposals that you have presented. And secondly, how are you working on gender perspective at CFE? Okay, so if you don't mind, I will start with the second question about our gender equity program. I work at the General Commission on Electricity. Basically, it's our state company that is in charge of electricity in Mexico, and in 2019, our General Director, Manuel Valle, decided to create a gender unit specifically to address these issues. So we had a diagnosis that we started from gender inequalities in the labor world, but we were addressing specific issues that in a way increase this gap in the energy sector. And it's even worse if we include that in other sectors like mining or construction. Also, we had a diagnosis to see the impact of electrification processes on women's and men's life. So with that diagnosis, we created a gender plan that has 5 different areas that have more than 50 actions that was approved by our administration council, and that gave it a binding nature. That was approved by the Board of Administration and then implemented by the company. So it is important to know that only one action or isolated actions are not enough, as Francisca mentioned. So we implemented actions that go from raising awareness between girls to inspire young women to get them closest to the industry. We visit generation plants or transmission plants. I remember the first time I went to a generation station and I became aware of all the miracles that need to take place for us to turn on a switch and the lights to turn on, and I was amazed by that. Fortunately, my family allowed me to study anything that I wanted. And I wonder, why is it that I am not an engineering? And basically it's because I had no one that was close to the industry, and also because I didn't have role models that were women that were successful in this environment. And we have translated that experience into strategies to attract young females to the industry. Also, we have specific strategies to protect workers in case of gender violence. We have a specific protocol for that, a digital application to report these kind of cases, and also a strategy to increase the number of workers. In 2019, 25% were women and 75 men. And in the management positions, only 6% were women. Today, we made progress, and in 4 years, now we reach 15%. It may sound like a little, but we are like 100,000 people company. So I'm very proud to say that yesterday we had our second general director appointed, and with that we have 10 generation companies, and now we have 2 general directors that are women. And that is a milestone for Mexico. All this has been backed up through the work in alliances and networks. We created a network for gender equality within the CFE. We also are part of the National Plan for Gender Equality in Mexico. We developed a plan that is called Red de Sororidad that basically promotes this exchange between women. We are also working with other organizations like Voz Experta, Expert Voice, that wants to make visible women within the energy sector, and also in alliances with other institutions. Today, this year, we were invited to Chile, to SE2023, that was organized with ISET and ECLAC, and we're very proud to attend that meeting. And let me tell you that we invite you in February next year. We're going to be hosting SE2023, and it will be a pleasure to have you there. And then moving on to electrification processes with a gender perspective. As part of the context, electrification in Mexico is around 99%, but we're a very large country. with a high density of population, so in the number of people, it's pretty significant, those that do not have electricity yet. And it also happens that in some places are very, very poor. So the CFE aim to rescue the social actions of the organization and work in these areas and to highlight the impact that we could have to implement social changes and working as a catalyzer. So thanks to one of our subsidiary companies and together with other different areas in the company, we work together and we brought individual solar panels to the Sierra de Sangolica, and we carried out surveys, and through that we have a baseline diagnosis so that we can have a picture of the situation in gender inequality aspects in the region. After that, we have the technical process of electrifying households. We provided training to the women in the region so that they can they know how to provide maintenance to those solar panels. And then we had a second survey to measure what we have heard in theory, that electricity has a very important impact on that. And that is all right, but we needed to measure that and to get to know more about it. And that was the second diagnosis that we had. And of course, that we checked there is immediate improvement in the quality of life, both of men and women. And basically, of course, this is a gender project, but still everybody has access to electricity and everybody enjoys those benefits. But we see the significant impact that it has on the quality of life of women. For instance, in the past, they even know that idea of free time. And now they can enjoy that concept of free time. It also allows them to have more access to information. Now they can use radios or community radios. It allows them to have the possibility of girls in school continue studying, and of course it also improved the perception of security of these women.
Bueno, María Cecilia, compartí con...
Okay, thank you, Maria Cecilia. Tell us a little bit about what's going on in Argentina.
Por la invitación, la verdad un honor estar acá, un honor haber.
It's an honor to be here, and it's great to listen to all these experiences and getting to know and being aware of how much we share in the region and also in the progress that we make. In Argentina, most of our policies in this topic are part of the National Plan for Mitigation of Climate Change that was approved last year and has different action lines. Gender and diversity is one of them, and also fair labor transition. Within that framework, the Energy Secretariat this year approved the strategy for the creation of a roadmap that will allow us to include more women in the energy sector that had 3 different stages. First one is a diagnosis. We are working very hard on that stage. Then we have a participatory process with industry stakeholders, and lastly is to include all these in the energy policy. What we did start in this cabinet for climate change to implement policies focused on the industry. One of the lessons learned of all this with the development of Igualar program that was developed by the Gender Ministry is to start working with different companies so that they can start implementing gender measures that then can be transformed in technical measures. In the case of energy, it was pretty important what the experience that we have with a company that operates with nuclear plants in Argentina, and what they did, basically working with the unions that are a key player in our country to think about all the inclusion policies, also training and different alliances to include and increase the number of women working in the nuclear sector. The nuclear sector is relevant once again, and as we heard in the first panel yesterday, we have the opportunity to talk about the importance of having these state policies that are consistent in that area and areas in which the state plays a very important role. Some other activities that we are implementing is also to start working on ISA. What would be an example of this, and there are more companies to include this, is for instance this violet label. This is for state or private companies, but also this will be required for the providers. We started working in entrepreneur credits. Basically, manager of the company, they should not have any debt with their partners. There's a national record of parents that do not comply with the requirements of providing support to their children, so managers of these companies should not be involved in that. And that is part of a policy focus on women that are victims of this kind of gender violence, economic violence. In Argentina, we are focusing on energy policies, and basically there are to bridge the gender gap and to understand the role played by women. So I will be repeating some of the things mentioned in this panel. As you can see, challenges are very similar. But when we started creating our baseline from formal employment, and this is important, it's not only about the number of jobs created by the energy transition process, but also that these jobs will be formal for economies that run the risk of informality, and also they're going to be well-paid jobs. So we have seen an increase in the employment of women, but 4 out of 10 work in the household or in the care services. But if we look at it, and this was already mentioned, we need to increase the number of women in management positions, and in some cases these are exceptional women. We have regular men and exceptional women with a lot of training, and those are the ones we found.
Pero también vemos que en toda la cadena.
And we also see that in all the operation chain, we see that there's still the number of women can be increased greatly.
With the energy industry in particular, and when I spoke with the chambers of the sector, we thought something that was key, which was the need of the companies to have models that are very masculine, and these also have to do with violence. These have been published in Argentina this year, which are bad for everyone. And today, apart from efficiency and justice, there is already a social standard that certain practices are no longer acceptable. So all these practices have to be denounced, and this is essential to our agenda. Also, apart from the role within the value chain, the transportation producers, we are now thinking about the role of women as consumers and as end users of the services. We have a country which is very big with a low density of population, so there we have a lot of rural areas, and we have the support of the World Bank, the Kermar program, and a clean energy program, where we can, by installing panels in many cases, we will give them energy because they cannot connect to the grid. So the testimony of the women is to have more time, more free time, and also to understand what it means to have energy. After your children go to school, they go to rural schools, and in that sense it's very similar. And also, what we're also seeing is those that are connected to the grid, we have a representation of single-parent households, and we see how women are head of households. And if we think about our energy transition policies, where we look at energy efficiency, they have to apply these practices in each of their households. The policies in which we are thinking, this has been mentioned before, is to have specific training for women, for rural communities that have solar panels, training as installers and repairers of solar panels. This is a problem we have today because sometimes we see migrant workers and women are left in the household, so everything that we can do to improve the service requires of women. And also, in each household, we have to see how we can have specific targets on women, because when we talk about changes in the use and greater efficiency, we see that households also play a specific role on women. This is a very new challenge for the Energy Secretariat in general, but it's accompanied with the support of the Ministry of Women, of Climate Change, and all the other areas that are working also on these issues. I am very lucky because this has changed. We have a majority of women staff in our area, in the Energy Secretariat. We have our delegate who's also here with us. She's just left. But I believe we can strengthen our work and support gender. And the last item is, after the Igualar label, we have all these technical standards. What the ISO standard means, we are also working on another standard. It's on gender equality for local companies, and it's representing the position of Argentina with this ISO 53800. It's a specific standard for gender equality in companies in general. So that is how we are approaching this issue. Thank you. Now to close, because we are a little bit delayed in time, I want to go back to the Honduras because he has a very short presentation and he wants to tell us a little bit about the experience of Honduras. We didn't show it to you before, but now we have it here. And then we will close. And I want to call to action all of us. Thank you very much again, Virginia. As I mentioned before, we are very lucky to be with the first president in Honduras, Ximena Castro, and she has made gender equality cross-cutting from her government plan. And we, as the staff of the state secretariats, different agencies of the state, we have adopted this vision as our responsibility, not only a responsibility towards her, but towards the society. And it's a debt that we have with society. So we have a vision of justice and gender equality, and we have taken that on in the energy sector also. So we have prepared a brief, let me stand. This is, I'll present this now. Among the priorities of the government, we can see that, as I mentioned before, we want to introduce the gender equity perspective with the equal participation throughout all the political processes. All the decisions made in state organizations must have this concept in mind and in their practices. One thing is to put things down in writing, and the other is to put them into practice. Here we can talk a lot about this concept, but if we do not adopt the concept as a behavior, then slowly we will have to adopt it in our daily lives. And that's the way that we do this as a social behavior. It takes time, but it's achievable. Also, we want to foster the economic reactivation and social reactivation through the participation of women in sectors that historically had vulnerabilities. And we look forward to the common well-being. We also talk about self-perceptions in society that have also been vulnerable. People are discriminated. So again, we must look at this. And for the rural communities, where we see this the most, we see inequalities the most there, we must focus a lot here. The energy policy that we have for 2038, which we will then extend to 2050, establishes as cross-cutting the gender justice in the understanding that this issue goes beyond rights, and it's also to ensure the conditions and the means that will allow reaching a progressive actions in a more just and equal society. I talked about our policy of universal access to electricity. We have three main axes. One is equal participation for access to electricity, also promoting the social and economic development and making it accessible to electricity services, and sustainable development and the well-being of the population in general. And we have planned something that has been mentioned before here by my colleagues in the panel, which is to make a diagnosis. We cannot move forward if we do not know where we stand today. And that diagnosis is work in progress. We are working with the state agencies to develop instruments that will allow us to tell us where we stand regarding equality, gender justice. And very shortly we will hold a meeting of women in the energy sector in order to establish a network and have interconnection between all the sectors around all the country of the women who are involved in the energy sector. This is not only something that we want to include in this sector, the energy sector. This must happen in all the sectors of our lives, in all professions, in all labor areas that we have in all our countries. So thank you very much. Very well. And to close, I would like to ask each one of you to please just take 30 seconds and tell us something you will be working on in the following months or years, what you will be working on in your offices, in your countries, and that you would like this international community to work with you on this, towards more women in the sector and more equality in the sector. I know it's a challenge. You only have 30 seconds. It's a call to action. What will you be doing, or what are you doing, and what would you like to see from this international community to do with you? Who would like to start? Go ahead. Right now, CFA is going through a modernization and construction process of electricity And we want these new plants will have a gender perspective. We want to have bathrooms for women, breastfeeding facilities, but we also want to be careful with the impacts of the construction of these new plants on the communities, surrounding communities. We want the new plants not to be constructed with an androcentric vision. I'll be very brief. In this just transition process, we must share standards internationally in the region. The efforts that we are doing in our country are no longer enough. We must go to a global scenario. So public policies have a very important role to set the standards. We have a very small ministry for this industry. So this effort, I think it's necessary to be done collectively as a region. The President talked about the structural gaps and the capacity gaps. We have work pillars. We don't have one solution for all, but we have identified many things that we can do collectively for these standards and these public policies. So the call to action is to join efforts. Let's all come to an agreement and work together. Thank you. I will add to what you said with regards to the creation of joint standards and reaching agreements, because sometimes we see the coming and going with regards to reaching agreements and on our agendas, and gender is not about this. So this is something that we must do collectively in all our countries. We must not only set the standards, but also create agreements regarding this. Then we must never forget why we are creating these agreements. And in the following years, something that we are doing is to achieve, on behalf of the companies, we want some part of the funds to be set for gender policies with regards to corporate responsibility. As I said before, this work that we have to do to make it a reality, to have a gender equality, this is something that is done slowly. It must be done progressively. We cannot do it overnight. We are establishing relations with the Ministry of Education to include energy and gender equality by understanding everything from the very beginning of education, from preschool to primary, all the way up to university. And this has to become part of us. It's not something that we hear about when we are adults or at university. And some people start demanding equal opportunities, gender equality. This must not be something new for us. This must be something that is part of us, from our house, from our home. We must hear it from our parents, our mother, our father, whoever we grow up with. We must see a respect for this. We must include this concept that we are equal in our rights. We are different in other aspects, but in our rights and opportunities, we must be equal, all of us, men and women. So this is something that I propose for you to do also in your countries. Marina? Well, I believe that the call to action at ECLAC has to do with making visible the importance of including gender equality everywhere and how this impacts the energy sector. And then also to look at the demand from different countries, because we work with the demand of countries at ECLAC, and we make available regional spaces to continue promoting these messages. Also, we have some projects of different capacities where we will continue working on making gender cross-cutting as it is required. In Chile, we already have our Women's Association of Energy, so we join all these associations in Latin America and the Caribbean. We must continue fostering all of this. And also, I represent the Chilean delegation of entrepreneurs and innovators in COP28. So we need to have energy transition, and we also need to have more women in startups, as investments, as entrepreneurs, everything. Thank you. I think there's a group of young women who come from Durazno. You're over there? Okay. First of all, thank you for being here. It's wonderful that you made it. And I would like to tell you, do some networking. I hope you can talk to all the people here. Durazno is a place where it's in the middle of Uruguay. Thank you very much to all of you, the panelists. I'm a focal point from 2017 for IDB on gender in Latin America and the Caribbean, and it's wonderful to see the progress that we are making in this area. We are already seeing the results. We're starting to talk about policies. We are seeing the results. We are in a new stage, and it's great to see this. We have a lot of work to do still, as President Bachelet mentioned, and President Emaldi, but let's join forces. Let's learn one from another. Let's continue on this path. Thank you to everybody. And now I will invite you to the next panel, which is on data. Thank you very much.